Great. Okay, so in my speech today, I'd like to actually start off by flashing with what Julia has told you today, and then I'm going to move into and show why, really, with my final 2 points, I'm going to show why this case falls on our side of the bench, well, my side of the bench, by myself today. Okay, so what has Julia talked about to you today? She's first of all said that it's dangerous and locking it up doesn't work. And she's brought up 2 examples of scientific innovation that didn't work, which is why we don't use CFCs anymore. You see that even when we started using them, we were able to stop when we found out the negative ramifications of them. And we think that's something we can also do with these here. Not this time, Julia. We think that we see things like positive innovations that happen, things like X-rays. And we think that if we hadn't had those innovations, they wouldn't have been able to use them as quickly, and a lot of people would have actually been harmed without those. We think that, maybe the slight damage to, people giving themselves cancer, sorry to hear you die, just a lovely person. But we think the innovations she made towards this work, in fact, allowed for many, many more people to be saved. And we think that's the important thing here, especially considering what we're looking at today. When we look at the environmental hazards posed to our world today, we don't think we necessarily have the baby steps that Julie is looking at. She's let's go very, very slowly here, people. And we think that's not necessarily something we have the time to do in our world today. But I'll take her point right now.
Alright, so you make it sound like we can fix all this, but don't we still have this gaping hole in our ozone and this gaping dying out of natural plants that could supply all sorts of products?
The gaping and hole in our ozone layers, partly part of our own fault, and not just necessarily because of CFCs, but also because other environmental damage we cause to it. And we think that if we want to actually rectify this environmental damage, GMO stuff is probably one of the ways we can do it, and probably one of the best ways we can do it. And then Julia talked about well, we're not going to have any more natural plants anymore. We acknowledge we have seed banks, that sort of thing, in order to preserve these that we have in our society. We think that obviously you should probably diversify your crops, which is basic farming mechanism. And we think the possible threat to the ecosystem is outweighed by the benefits to our environment of being able to use less land to grow more food and being able to, not have to damage these natural ecosystems as much. When you don't have to, plow down the rainforest to make room to grow wheat, you can, instead grow it in a smaller area of land. We think that benefits the ecosystem as a whole. So what else has she looked at today? She's she also talked about the floodgates and basically frivolous things are going to be made and that we're going to have monkey ponies. I don't think many scientists are going to be sweet, I want to make a monkey pony. Well, you know what? If they do and they learn something valuable about science and knowledge, really, do we care? If they learn something about how to benefits towards medical technology and engineering technology, that's still a gain in our knowledge, and we end up having a monkey pony, which is pretty useless. But as long as it's not hurting anyone, do it. We don't really care about this because we think the way and the process of getting there and the process that we learn from that is probably the more important part. Not this time, Julia. She's also looked at basically there's social consequence here, which is basically that there's religious people in our society and we think this will make them sad. And what we're going to look at here today is that, okay, you know what, we think there are people with different views in our society, and we think, we should possibly respect those views, but we don't all have to do exactly what every person in our society says. If these religious individuals don't want to be involved in this movement, they don't have to be. They don't have to eat this food, they don't have to, be around these animals, they don't even have to benefit from the medical technology if they really don't want to. We don't think they have to be involved, and we think that's respecting their belief, not making all of society conform to these religious people's beliefs. She's also, actually, take your point before I talk about it.
Doesn't everyone's tax money go to fund this?
Possibly part of their tax money does, and we think tax money goes to fund things that a lot of people sometimes don't like. My tax dollars go to fund the army. I'm not 100% fond of that. We think when you choose your taxes and you choose to be part of the Canadian social contract, you don't necessarily get to decide and impose your moral values on how your money is spent. Even though it would be kind of awesome to be check off the box of healthcare, all those things that you wanted to spend money on. Wow, that's my speech. Okay, so what have we also looked at? She also brought up animal rights. We think we as communities of is this animal going to be sad or not? Is it going to be an incredible amount of pain? How can we minimize the pain? And we think those are the best to deal with it. But as I already brought up, there's aspect of knowledge that we think is valued by our society. We think in the process of doing things, we learn a lot about ourselves and about society. And we think even when you're doing something that may seem rather frivolous in science of making this monkey pony, we think that process teaches you a lot about yourself and teaches you a process that you can then apply to a lot of other things. Making maybe a cow provides more meat for that. Making some sort of different animal that can in some way help our society a lot more. Or, being able to do these genetically modifications in a way that helps society in a very good way. So even though the process, the end result may seem slightly frivolous, the process is probably very important here. And so I think we're out of time. So what did we look at today? We looked at utility, we looked at safety. Julia's kind of brought up this like fear mongering that she's like afraid, like it's not going to work, like we're going to just like lose it at some point, like people always. We think that's a bit silly on the her fault, and we think we can trust these like preventive measures here. She looked at human intervention.